Is the raging war between Russia and Ukraine part of Bible prophecy? It is certainly a horrific war. It's the biggest land war in Europe since World War II, since the Holocaust. And more than 1 million Russian soldiers have already been killed or wounded, severely wounded, in this war, 3.5 years old now. Ukrainians have suffered 400,000 casualties. That's deaths and wounded. And a lot of those, yes, of course, a lot of those are fighters, soldiers fighting in Russia, but it's also a lot of civilians. There was a terrible missile attack here overnight while I came to Ukraine. And I'm going to talk to you for a moment on this YouTube exclusive on the Rosenberg Report about whether what we're seeing here is not just a bad war, but is it actually Bible prophecy coming to pass? I believe it is, and I'm going to explain to that. But first, I just want to show you what happened. I mean, literally, I had an interview with Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelenskyy last night. We're going to cover that on the Rosenberg Report on the broadcast. But that was a fascinating conversation, and you don't want to miss it. We talked about his meeting with President Trump in the Oval Office. What did Trump tell Zelenskyy about what Vladimir Putin said to him? I'll tell you one thing, Putin said he was ready to make serious concessions for peace. But just hours after I recorded that interview with Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelenskyy, and just hours after we sat together in the Situation Room in the Ukrainian presidential compound, I was awakened in the middle of the night with massive explosions just ripping through the Ukrainian capital of Kyiv. And I came here to see the damage. These cars were all perfectly intact when people went to bed last night. I want to just take you through, but this became an inferno in the middle of the night as a direct ballistic missile hit suicide drones, many of them probably made in Iran and by Iran and sold to Russia. But look at the destruction, the absolute destruction of these cars. I feel like I'm in Israel because I've shown you, I've taken you to Kiryat Shmona, for example, in the north of Israel, when Hezbollah missiles built by Iran landed and just completely destroyed cars. This is not slight damage. This is damage, okay? That's bad. This is total meltdown. This is an inferno. And that's what Vladimir Putin is doing. These are not military vehicles, okay? I just have to tell you, this is actual civilian cars, because what's happening? Vladimir Putin told Trump, I'm interested in peace. I'm ready to make peace. I'm ready to make serious concessions to make peace. I want to make peace. And then he's attacking, he's firing more ballistic missiles and suicide drones at Ukraine, all over Ukraine, including here at the capital, than he has in much of this war. And now you're seeing some of the destruction, some of the consequences of Putin's lies. The man is a liar and is a murderer. Should President Trump be negotiating with him? Sure. We need to get this thing to an end. But we just have to understand who we're dealing with. We're dealing with the war criminal of the Kremlin. And this is evidence of the type of sickness of Vladimir Putin. The man, in my view, he's not ready for peace. Maybe Trump can use all kinds of leverage to get him to make peace, to back up, to back off, and to end the killing. Maybe. I don't know. We need to be praying for that. But as you look over here, and we're dealing with this in the full broadcast on the Rosenberg Report. But look at that building. That's an apartment building, and that is a direct hit by a Russian ballistic missile. And the devastation is just horrible. The fires were raging all night. By the time we got here this morning, the fire was mostly out. It was smoke. But you're seeing, I mean, the rescue operations are still going on to see if there are people in there. But the attacks overnight, just in the capital city of Kyiv, which is where I am now, at least 12 Ukrainian civilians dead, including 3 children, ages 12, 14, and 17. Okay, at least 48 Ukrainian civilians wounded, some of them severely, just in the attacks overnight while I've been here. The attacks that woke me up as explosions were rocking my hotel room and ripping across the city. So this is the war that's going on. It's been going on for 3.5 years. Okay, and as I say, more than 1 million Russians are dead. The situation is so bad that Putin has had to recruit and persuade the North Koreans to send ground troops, North Korean ground troops, to fight in Ukraine, because the Ukrainians have been so strong, so brave, so creative and clever, and so resilient to stop the Russian attacks. But over 1 million Russian soldiers have died. About 400,000 Ukrainians have died. Many of them are soldiers, but many of them are civilians as well. So what does that mean? I want to take you and to show you some more of this destruction. Then I want to keep talking about, I'm going to answer this question. Is this prophecy? Is this just a bad geopolitical moment? Is this just a bad, hard war? Right? Not every war is prophetic. Okay? I want to be careful about that. And I want you to be careful about that. But look at what's going on. And when you look at the destruction, just because there's destruction doesn't mean it's prophecy. But I want to tell you why I believe that what we're watching is actual Bible prophecy. And it's because of this. So several things. Jesus warned his disciples in Matthew 24 and Luke 21 that there would be wars and rumors of wars in the last days. Okay? As we get closer to the return of Christ, there are going to be some really horrible wars. Okay? And what have we seen over the last 100 years or so? We saw World War I. We saw World War II. We saw the Cold War. We've seen all kinds of genocides around the world. We saw the Holocaust. We saw the genocide in Cambodia. We saw the genocide in Rwanda, right? Not just killing, specific efforts to exterminate whole populations. We've also seen, of course, earlier in the 20th century, the Holocaust of the Armenian people by Turkey. So this is bad, okay? And what we've seen over the last 100 years, I think, really are evidence of a war of nation rising against nation and kingdom against kingdom. Now, since the World War II and since the Cold War, I would say that we've seen terrible wars and lots of terrorism, but we haven't seen massive land wars, not long ones, not ones that go on for year after year after year. But when Russia invaded Ukraine on February 24th, 2022, this began the biggest land war in Europe since World War II, since the Holocaust. And this is the biggest land war in the world right now, okay, for the last several years. Yeah, the wars in Israel have been terrible, and we've been covering that. And I believe that is prophetic also. But this, I believe, is prophetic because it's not just a, quote, normal war. It's not just a quick war. It's not just a small war. All wars are bad, okay? And of course, the Old Testament in the book of Ecclesiastes says there's a time for war, there's a time for peace. Wars are going to happen in a fallen, broken, sinful world. And sometimes you have to fight to defend yourself. But this is not a normal war. This is the biggest, bloodiest, most brutal war in the world, and it keeps going on. So that I think is very consistent with Jesus saying in Matthew 24 and Luke 21 that we're going to be seeing more of this as we go into the last days. Okay, that's one thing. But it's not just that. And come around here. We're going to go over to another building that was very severely damaged. This warehouse. One of the other things that Jesus talked about in Matthew 24 and Luke 21 is the persecution of Christians. Okay, he said that the persecution of Christians is going to get worse as we get closer and closer to the return of Jesus Christ. Now, let me again make a point. When Jesus talks about this list of all these different geopolitical events, plagues, right? These terrible diseases that are going to spread across the world. I believe that COVID and the death of more than 7 million people several years ago, I believe that was one of the plagues that Jesus was speaking about in the last days. Jesus talked about environmental things. He talks about a whole list of things, right? And he calls them birth pangs. Why does he call them birth pangs? Come on, let's keep going. Other journalists are covering it, but he calls them birth pangs. And what's a birth pang? It's when a woman is getting closer and closer to the arrival of the one that she's been waiting for, the one that she's expecting. And as she gets closer to delivery, to arrival, there's a contraction and a release. A contraction and a release. And as you really get closer, my wife had 4 sons, so I watched her go through this. I held her hand through all of it. She went through enormous amounts of pain. And as we got closer to the arrival, what would happen? Contraction, release. Contraction, release. The contractions, as you got closer to arrival, got much more painful, much longer. much more difficult to endure. And the release times were shorter, okay? This was a problem, but this is what you have to expect as you get closer to the arrival of the one that you're waiting for. And that's the analogy that Jesus used. He said, these things are bad, but they're going to get worse and worse and worse as we get closer to the return of Christ. Now, I'm not saying that the return of Jesus is going to happen tomorrow, okay? I don't know when the return of Jesus is going to happen, okay? I don't know. Jesus said that no one knows the day or the hour. But when you see events that are not normal, okay? Yeah, there's occasional wars, there are occasional skirmishes, they're all bad. But when you see something that people say, that's the biggest war in the world in our era, in our age, you know that's different. That's not normal. And that's exactly the types of things Jesus talked about. COVID was not normal. The death of 7 million people by horrific diseases that are spreading across the world, that's not normal, okay? That was a birth pain, contraction, and then a release. The war that Iran set into motion on October 7th, 2023, against Israel, from Hamas, from Hezbollah, from Yemen, from Iran itself, and from 7 different places, that is a contraction that continues. That contraction is not released. It's not over. We're still in this thing. We feel like we can barely breathe, emotionally, spiritually. Okay, so this is the war against Israel, including the war in the media against Israel, the war to convict Israel in the International Criminal Court of genocide, of starving the people of Gaza. All of these are attacks. They're wicked attacks against Israel. And this is the type of thing that Jesus warned would happen in the last days. This war is one of those. Israel and Iran have stopped their missile war, but a spiritual battle is still taking place. Today, nearly 99% of Israelis don't yet know Jesus. Think about that. Nearly 99% of Israelis don't yet know Jesus, but a miracle is unfolding. One for Israel is a ministry that shares the gospel. And I can tell you, Jewish people are starting to accept Jesus in numbers not seen since the early church. Many Arabs are also finding faith and unity. One for Israel is an initiative of native-born Israelis sharing the gospel, discipling believers, and equipping spiritual leaders across Israel. As Romans 10:1 expresses, my heart's desire and prayer to God for Israel is that they may be saved. Your support helps bring the gospel back to Israel. I want you to do something right now. Pick up the phone and call 800-892-9065. That's 800-892-9065 to help share the gospel in Israel. Visit oneforisrael.org/partner or scan the QR code. Jesus also talked about the persecution of his followers, the persecution of the church, that would not only happen, but get worse and worse. And throughout the 20th century, any expert that you talk to will tell you that the persecution of Christians in the 20th century was at its apex, at its zenith. It was just terrible, right? You had the Soviet Empire, what President Ronald Reagan rightly called the evil empire. The Soviet Union demanded that everybody be an atheist and a communist, and that they couldn't believe in God. Children were raised to believe there is no God, okay? Christians were imprisoned, churches were closed, okay? Churches were turned into communist museums. That was a terrible persecution of the church. And obviously, communist China did the same thing. So that was horrible in the 20th century, but now you've got radical Islamism, the Iranian regime and other terror groups and terror regimes, killing Christians, slaughtering Christians, imprisoning Christians, destroying churches, closing churches, right? We had the genocide by ISIS, the Islamic State, against Christians in Syria and Iraq, right? That was a horrific genocide in our lifetime, in this century, in the 21st century. But now, what you've got is Vladimir Putin, the war criminal of the Kremlin, and he is killing Christians, okay? He is closing churches. He is bombing churches. He is imprisoning and killing pastors and priests. I've been talking to Christian leaders all throughout Ukraine over the last few days while being here, and they said to me, look, Joel, it's not just the bombing. It's not just the missiles. It's not just the suicide drones or the artillery or the machine guns on the front lines. All true, all bad. But he said, Christianity is being systematically destroyed in every area where Putin and his murderous military machine has invaded, right? So whether it's Crimea or in this, what's the region known as the Donbass region, the eastern provinces of sovereign Ukrainian territory, this is where Putin has invaded, this is where he's fighting, this is where he's holding, and Ukraine so far has not been able to get this land back. They are fighting valiantly to keep Putin from invading Kyiv, this capital city. That's why he's resorting to bombing it. We're going to turn this way for a second so you can see more of that building as we finish this discussion. But the point is, the Christian leaders here, I've talked to many Christian leaders, Ukrainian Christian leaders. These are not politicians, these are Ukrainian followers of Jesus from a wide range of denominations, and they're telling me in those occupied territories where Russia has invaded and taken over sovereign Ukrainian land, that is exactly where Putin has destroyed 47 churches, including 22 evangelical Protestant churches. Okay, that's a big deal. Okay, more than 100 pastors and priests, Ukrainian Christian pastors and priests, in those occupied territories controlled now by Russia have been killed. The numbers may be higher because there's a lot of people who've just plain disappeared. Ukrainian Christians don't know where they are. Are they in prison? Are they being tortured? Are they being harassed? Or are they dead? Okay, so there's even these numbers I'm giving you, they don't tell the whole story. But you can't be a follower of Jesus Christ and have any level of religious freedom at all in those occupied territories. In Ukraine, Christian leaders tell me this is some of the best religious freedom in the world. You can preach the gospel. You can lead people to Jesus Christ. You can baptize them. You can disciple them. You can plant new churches. And that's what Christians here are doing. You can't do that legally in the occupied territories. Now, we'll talk later in a different YouTube video and on the Rosenberg Report broadcast about how God is moving very powerfully, not only in Ukraine, to wake up a sleeping semi-Christian, traditional Christian society. Many Ukrainians are giving their lives fully and completely to Jesus Christ, being filled with the Holy Spirit. That's exciting. And they tell me that churches are being planted, secret underground churches are being planted in those occupied territories by very brave gospel missionaries, Ukrainians, reaching Ukrainians behind enemy lines. And they're meeting secretly, they're underground churches. So those are more stories, and those are hopeful stories in the days ahead. We'll share that. But my point is that Jesus warned that persecution would be real and it would get worse. So we're not just talking about Soviet era persecution of the church. We're not just talking about communist China persecution of the church. Those are real. Radical Islamism persecution of the church. Absolutely. It's horrific. We're not just talking about that. We're talking about Vladimir Putin persecuting Christians, saying that he is the leader of the Russian Orthodox Church, saying that he's a Christian, and acting like an antichrist. Not the Antichrist, but an antichrist. Tremendous persecution. And I believe when you put all these factors together, this is why I believe that the war that Putin set into motion here in Ukraine is part of Bible prophecy. I believe it is part of the last days birth pangs that the Lord spoke of. I think that we are watching something horrible unfold, and we've got to be careful as Christians in the United States and in Canada and Israel and around the world to not let this war be seen as just a political issue. It is political. How did President Biden handle it? How is President Trump handling it? Those are important issues. How is Speaker Mike Johnson handling it? Yeah, all important. But I'm asking us to talk about what's happening for real on the battlefront. What is Putin doing? And what is Zelenskyy doing? Zelenskyy is Jewish. He doesn't believe in Jesus. He's the first ever Jewish president of Ukraine. And talking to Ukrainian Christians, they say, we love him. We don't agree with him on everything, but we are praying for him. He is brave. He is strong. He is leading us to victory. He's keeping Putin back from destroying our entire country. And it's Zelenskyy, they say, these Ukrainian Christian leaders say, it's Zelenskyy who's protecting the religious freedom of Christians and Jews and Muslims and others here in Ukraine, not just evangelicals. Zelensky's protecting the religious freedom of Orthodox Jews and Roman Catholics and others, okay? It's Zelenskyy, the Jewish unbeliever, who's protecting religious freedom here. Whereas Mad Vlad, Vladimir Putin, the czar, the would-be czar of Russia, the war criminal of the Kremlin, it's him who's killing Christians. It's him who's killing pastors and priests. It's him, Putin, who's destroying churches, bombing churches, disappearing Christians, and making it impossible to be an above-ground, open follower of Jesus Christ in those occupied territories. And I'll add, the stories I'm hearing are so grisly, they're so gruesome, they're so horrible about Christians in those occupied territories being tortured by Russian soldiers and Russian intelligence, electrocuted, beaten with baseball bats, pastors forced to say, here are my lists of all the people in my church, and if they don't do it, they're beaten, they're electrocuted, or they're murdered. This is the world we live in. And as bad as it is, it's not just geopolitically bad. It's not just religiously bad. I believe it's prophetic. I think Vladimir Putin is an Antichrist, again, to be clear, not the Antichrist, but he has got the spirit of Antichrist in him. He is fighting the church. He's teamed up with the Iranian revolutionary radicals against Israel, against the Sunni moderate Arab world, against the United States, against the Christians of Europe, against the Christians of Ukraine. It's important because there's been a lot of misinformation that Putin and his minions are flooding into churches in the United States, Canada, and around the world. And it's important that we understand the truth. And I came here to Ukraine to find the truth as a journalist, as a Christian, and I got to say it's very sobering what I've learned. But we have hope. Ukrainians are coming to faith in Christ. New churches are being planted. The church is strong, tired, but strong, resilient, because the Holy Spirit is working. In the darkness that Vladimir Putin has created, the light of Jesus Christ is shining very brightly. And I've been very encouraged by this story, very honored to come cover it, and we'll have more in the days and weeks to come, both on the Rosenberg Report YouTube channel, which I hope you're subscribed to, on the Rosenberg Report broadcasts on Thursday nights and Saturday nights on TBN, and of course on All Israel News as well. I hope you'll follow us on all of that and on social media from Kyiv, from Ukraine, from the epicenter of this horrific war and the site of the latest ballistic missile attack by the war criminal of the Kremlin, Vladimir Putin. I'm Joel Rosenberg. God bless you. Keep praying for Israel. Keep praying for the peace of Jerusalem. Keep praying for our neighbors. And keep praying for the people and leaders of Ukraine.